You know that feeling when you scroll through a dozen bead rollers, see a shiny 24-inch model with a perfect-looking frame, and think, this is exactly what my shop needs, only to have it arrive and discover the motor sputters, the rollers wobble, or the machine simply takes up more floor space than you can actually use? That gap between the glossy listing and the day-to-day reality is why I'm doing this deep dive before you spend any money. I've spent the last few days watching a few metal shaping videos, reading the spec sheet, and talking to a couple of hobbyists who actually own a Woodward Fab 24-inch power bead roller. So you get a perspective that's grounded in real-world use instead of just a copy and paste of manufacturer hype. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. First, let's set the stage for anyone who's not familiar with what a bead roller actually does. In a typical small shop or garage setting, a bead roller is used to create a raised bead along the length of a metal sheet. That bead adds rigidity, improves the look of a fabricated part, and can be a quick way to fix a flexing panel without having to add extra material. The 24-inch size is the sweet spot for most hobbyist projects. It's large enough to handle standard sheet dimensions, think 24-48-inch panels, but still compact enough to fit in a corner if you're working in a limited space. Who should consider pulling the trigger on this Woodward Fab unit? If you already own a benchtop press, a small hydraulic bender, or a set of sheet metal tools and you find yourself constantly wrestling with thin-gauge aluminum or mild steel that bends too easily, a bead roller can give you that extra stiffness with a single pass. The 24-inch model is especially handy for automotive restoration work, adding a bead to a car's floor pan or door skins, for DIY furniture builders who want a decorative edge on a steel tabletop, and for anyone who does a lot of prototyping where weight-to-strength ratios matter. The motor is rated for continuous operation, so if you're planning to run a series of panels back-to-back, you won't be tripping a thermal cutoff every few minutes. On the flip side, if your projects are limited to small-scale sheet metal work, say, you only ever cut 12-inch squares for art pieces, or you're mostly working with plastics and composites, the 24-inch footprint becomes more of a liability. The unit weighs close to 150 pounds, so moving it in and out of a cramped garage will be a chore, and the floor space it occupies could be better used for a workbench or a dedicated welding station. Also, if you don't already have a power source that can reliably handle a 1-horsepower motor, most home circuits can, but you'll want a dedicated 120V outlet to avoid tripping breakers. You'll need to factor in that extra electrical upgrade. Now, let's talk about the practical strengths that actually show up when you fire the machine up. The first thing you'll notice is the consistency of the bead. Woodward Fab has designed the roller pair to stay perfectly parallel throughout the run, which means you get an even, uniform bead from one end to the other without having to manually adjust pressure every few inches. In practice, that translates to less time spent re-rolling a panel because the first pass was off-center. For a hobbyist who is still learning the feel of metal flow, that reliability is a huge confidence booster. The second strength is the speed control. The unit comes with a variable frequency drive that lets you dial the roller speed from a slow crawl for delicate aluminum up to a brisk rate for thicker steel. In my conversations with owners, the ability to start slow and gradually increase speed helped them avoid the dreaded springback that can happen when you push a bead too fast on a material that isn't ready to take the deformation. The motor's torque is also generous enough that you can roll a 16-gauge steel panel without stalling, something that cheaper 12-inch rollers often struggle with. A practical downside that keeps popping up is the noise level. Even though the motor is enclosed, the rollers themselves generate a metallic whine that can be pretty loud in a small garage. It's not a deafening roar, but if you're sensitive to sound or you have neighbors close by, you'll likely want to schedule your bead rolling sessions for times when the house is empty. The other issue is the lack of an integrated dust extraction port. When you roll steel or aluminum, tiny metal shavings and burrs can be ejected, and without a vacuum attachment you'll end up sweeping the floor afterward. Adding a shop vac isn't a big investment, but it's something you have to plan for. One hidden trade-off that isn't obvious from the product page is the learning curve associated with proper material feeding. The rollers are 24 inches long, which sounds convenient, but you have to keep the sheet moving at a steady pace, If you feed it too quickly, the bead will flatten out, and if you